Hello, I'm Kevin Benedict, Senior Analyst for Digital Transformation and Mobility here at Cognizant. And I want to thank all of you guys for joining us today. Now, today I have a whole panel of experts. This is so much fun that are joining us today to share some of the recent findings from research that they're involved in. Matter of fact, let me just go down the list and introduce some of those. Ben Pring, why don't you wave to the audience? All right, so Ben Pring, he's the co-director for the Center for the Future of Work here at Cognizant and the co-author of the book Code Halos, a brilliant book on the latest trends that companies need to be thinking about and doing to prepare for the digital world out there. My next guest I want to introduce is Ted Shelton, and he's the Vice President of Digital Works at Cognizant. How you doing, Ted?
I'm doing great. Great to see you. Thanks for having us.
Awesome. And Ted's also the author of a book called Social, Mobile, and Cloud. You can find that on Amazon as well. So we've got a whole panel of experts here. And last but not least is my colleague, Jack Crawford. Jack is the Senior Director for Consulting at the Solutions Consulting Group here at Cognizant. And I know a customer interface and experience expert in his own realm. Jack, thanks for joining us.
Greetings.
Now, let me just ask, let's go right down the list. Where are you calling in from, Ben?
I'm at home today in sunny Falmouth, Massachusetts. The snow's beginning to melt, so everybody's breathing a sigh of relief.
All right. And where are you calling in from, Ted?
I am calling in from sunny California, Northern California, where we don't get any snow at all. Even in the mountains anymore.
And Jack, where are you calling in from?
I'm calling in 8 hours south of Ted in Southern California, where we never have clouds.
Well, I can truly say I'm here in Boise, Idaho today, and the sky is a deep blue, and we're just having gorgeous spring weather as well. Again, thank you guys for joining. Now let's just jump right in here with the subject of today. And the subject we're talking about here is really the putting the experience in digital customer experience. And before we go further, Ben, you've just published this paper, Experience in Digital Customer, putting the experience in digital customer experience. Let's define some of these terms. What do you mean by digital customer experience? What's the scope there, Ben?
Yeah, well, to give you a little bit of the context and the sort of backstory to it, as we were pushing, as you mentioned in the introduction, Kevin, the Code Halo story out into the marketplace the last sort of 18 months, particularly the last 9 months or so, it became very obvious to us as we were talking to people, talking to clients, talking to people out in the marketplace who sort of look at these trends, that really where the notion of taking the digital experience to the next level was really the most sort of profound and the most powerful, was really sort of making the most sense to people, was in the way that they interacted with their customers, how they sold, how they serviced, how they prospected, the whole kind of end-to-end sales life cycle, if you like. And clearly that's going through a pretty radical, profound change at the moment as digital technology sort of infuse into every aspect of our lives, every aspect of what it is we do and how we do it. And so the digital kind of interface between customers is really our sense of where the heat in the marketplace was. And I'm sure as people who are kind of listening to this and interested in these topics sense that that phrase, the sort of digital experience, the digital customer experience, it's sort of gone from being something that not many people were thinking about to something that everybody's thinking about in a very short period of time. And it's almost in danger of sort of becoming a cliche, the notion that we're all having an experience, the transaction is being supplemented and surpassed in some way by the experience. And certainly as we've been talking about code halos, we've had the feeling that a lot of people understand the power of that potential opportunity. But also, as I started thinking about it even further, I had this sneaking sort of little skeptical, cynical thought in the back of my head that in fact when you or I, us all individually, are buying an airline ticket, asking an engineer to come online, sort of interacting with our taxes online, we're not really having an experience at all. most of these interactions are actually pretty, pardon the French, pretty crappy, pretty uninspiring. And so there's a dichotomy in the market. We all understand that digital and the interaction we can have digitally is so important, but we also know from our own personal experiences that most of those interactions are pretty underwhelming. So we wanted to go off and sort of do some research to look at that kind of paradox in the marketplace, to get a read from executives who are in charge of the digital interface within their organizations, what they were doing, what they were thinking, what sort of plans they had in place to upgrade the experience, what sort of work they were doing to create an experience. And I use, the phrase experience is a synonym for what an American person might say is awesome, and what an English person like me might say is, not bad. So we wanted to go out, talk to these folks, get some read on them, and probably the biggest sort of finding that came out of this, Kevin, and really is the core foundational building block of the report that we've written, and what Jack and Ted and yourself were all going to discuss, is that a very, very small percentage of these executives who are running these things in their organizations, really, when you ask them to put their hand on their heart, very few of them actually believe the experience they're offering their clients is good, is really excellent, is going to differentiate them in the marketplace, and really going to sort of live up to the brand promise that they're trying to push into the marketplace. Only 3% of the respondents in this sample of 300 people across Europe and the States that we looked at, only 3% of them believe that the digital customer experience is excellent. And even with all the work they're going to do in the next 3 years, only about 15% of them think that they're really going to be in that sort of top tier. And if you step back from that, and if you believe that the digital interface with people, with customers, is really the sort of key to monetize all of this incredible digital transformation opportunity in front of us, then you step back from that, and it's kind of a worrying finding. And clearly, there's a lot of steps ahead of us to really take this to the level where it should be.
So Ben, when you talk about digital, what do you include in there? Is that the desktop, the laptop, and mobile? And what do you think about when you talk about digital experience?
Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of language, and we're not being too precise semantically in our definition here. But it's the notion of omni-channel interface. It's the notion of having a consistent, holistic, organic experience across the physical and the virtual. So it's all really integrated in a way that allows somebody to see me as an individual, and for me to see the retailer or the government department that I'm interacting with in the physical world when I walk into their store or their office or their department, when I go online on my desktop, when I go online with my mobile or my tablet, that there's a seamless journey across all of those things, and they're all tied together to present this kind of unified omni-channel vision to the person they're interacting with.
Okay, so Ben, let me just ask, and then let's jump into the report here. Why should somebody sit through this video today? Why is that important? How's it going to impact, competition? Why should they listen to this?
Well, because, I mean, a simple observation, Kevin, the companies who are doing really well in the marketplace, and perhaps, the knee plus ultra company of our era, Apple, the reason they're doing so well, the reason Apple is the most successful company in the history of the world, is because they've created that seamless digital experience, that seamless hybrid experience between when you walk into an Apple store, when you walk onto their website, when you're interacting with iTunes, when you're interacting with any of their properties. That's a beautiful digital experience. It's a beautiful omni-channel experience. And if you believe, as we do, that they are sort of aspirationally where so many companies should be heading, insurance companies, airlines, the government, every company should be looking to that and aspirationally, going for that, then from a competitive point of view, well, that's a pretty clear signal, I think, in which way the wind is blowing currently.
Got it. And so why don't we jump right into the report with that. Ben, what did you find when you were interviewing those 300 people? What should we take away from this report?
Yeah, a couple of things, and then we'll open it up to Ted and Jack. I mean, a couple of things that are really important. A lot of the respondents in the survey conceptually understand this and understand the power of metadata. Metadata, from a technical point of view, is really the sort of key foundational technology that's going to create the code halo, as we call it, the digital fingerprint, make sense of that, and then be able to commercialize it and monetize it. So about about 30% of companies are collecting metadata currently, and in the next few years that number's probably going to double. But at the same time, only a small number of companies are actually able to make sense of that currently, and even at a push in the next 3 years, it's still going to be a minority of this respondent base that's going to really be able to make sense of that. So that's a big area of work. Another thing which is kind of surprising, again, to some leading edge companies who have been doing this for many years, looking at API traffic across their websites, the journey, the digital journey that somebody has when they come to your website, what they look at, what they discount, how they move through the sales process, through the buying process. A very small percentage of companies are looking at API traffic now. I mean, again, to me, that's kind of astonishing in the modern era in 2015 that isn't more common and that isn't more kind of foundational to what they're doing. So that's a couple of thoughts, Kevin. And sorry.
Yeah. So Ben, you keep bringing up the metadata and API transactional data, but so that data is there, or it can be there. But what are they supposed to do with it? What is that? You say the data is there and people aren't using it, but what would you hope they would figure out how to use that?
Well, this is the key argument within the code halo idea, Kevin. That if I walk into Macy's, I'm just another middle-aged white guy. They look at me and they sell to me as though I'm just another middle-class, middle-aged white guy. They make the same recommendations, the same suggestions. You might like this shirt. You might like this suit. When I go into Netflix, because Netflix has looked at all the things I've browsed, all the things I've watched, all of the things I've discounted when they've suggested something, they begin to understand me in a way that Macy's can't. That's the core simple idea, and all of that is driven off the metadata, the information that I'm giving them when I'm interacting with them digitally. So our argument in Code Halos, the argument in the paper, the work that Jack and Ted are focused on, is taking that data, understanding it, making sense of it, and turning that into commercial realization based on suggestions, based on value add, that is the core to what we call the $1 trillion club. These companies like Apple and Netflix and Pandora who are stretching their sort of lead in this next generation of competition.
Got it. So I'm going to step over here to Ted now. Ted, so there's all this data, and companies are being taught and are learning from the book Code Halo and other places that the data is critical to being able to serve the best user experience possible to customers. But what are they to do with that data? From your perspective, so there's all these databases packed full of data. How does that actually turn into a better experience?
Mm-hmm. Well, so let me unpack that a little bit, because I think one of the challenges that most of our clients, when we sit down with our clients and talk through this Code Halos opportunity with them, what they realize is, yes, they do have a lot of data, but they don't necessarily have the right data. They're not collecting all the data they need, and they aren't getting the data from other third-party sources that they need. Because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do, as Ben has elucidated, is use the data to inform how we improve customer experience. So if when Ben walks into Macy's, they still don't know that he grew up in the United Kingdom, then they aren't going to properly be able to connect with him as a unique customer as opposed to just another one of a crowd. And so how is it that a company knows that he's from the United Kingdom, for example, as one data point that may not be in that database? And I think one of the really important things that Ben mentioned in his opening remarks is the transition we are seeing, the transition point we are at right now, and have been pushing over the tipping edge of over the last year or two around the instrumentation of physical space and the data that comes from the physical interactions that we have. Because I think the interesting change here, if we look back 20 years, say the first web browsers, the first interactions that we had online, the first ability for us to leave digital footprints started roughly 20 years ago when the web browser became something that the mass market began to understand. It broke out of the America Online and the other controlled sort of online sources that had been there for a few years before that. And so the first place that we started to have all this data was online commerce. And so people like Netflix, which has an entirely native digital experience for their customer, certainly have an enormous amount of data about how those individuals interact. But what most businesses do is they interact with people in the real world. And it's only been through the evolution of the mobile device and sensors built into physical environments where when I am going to receive a service or I am going to purchase a product, that suddenly now an enormous amount of new data is possible, is available to be captured about that customer interaction. And thus you both pulled into a database to be studied. So part of this is about how do you build in your company the capability of analyzing data and rapidly experimenting with that data to be able to understand how that data can be used to be able to improve experience, but also using the data to push back into the experience. So how does the data inform and improve the experience itself as well? And so really it's only been the last couple of years that we've had even an ability at all to be able to instrument that physical world experience. That, to me, is going to be the story over the next decade, though, and that is going to be the huge shift in customer expectations, that we are going to be able to walk into Macy's, we are going to be recognized, the Macy's or whoever the company is going to be able to know enough about us to give us a rich experience.
Got it. So let me step over to Jack. Jack, how do you see all this data that's now available and collected when companies have these code halo strategies in place and all this data is there? How do they actually deliver, again, a unique and mass personalized, if you would, a personal experience for Jack?
Personal experience for me. Well, it comes down to a phrase, 3 words, segment of one. And we're using this with our customers today to talk about transitioning from segmenting as Ben described, where you walk into a store or have another interaction with an airline or any type of business that is seeking to provide a service and or receive payment for same, that if you're able to understand not just the person, but what step in the journey they're in. Have they had some life experience? And this is discussed in the paper, that there may be a life experience that adds value to something. My wife just said children, my son's going to college, you name it. And so that's one point. But here's where we see where we have the, not a roadblock, but basically friction. And the friction in enterprises that we're working with is investment. They're not certain what the return on investment may be. While at the leadership level, they're ready to move. IT budgets are fixed a year in advance. Marketing budgets are fixed pretty much throughout the year, and you have to give up something to get something. So the story that I try to bring, and I know Ted tries to bring as well, is that it's about scale. You can't have personal experiences today with persons. It doesn't scale. Call centers and sales reps and every other type of human-to-human experience is breaking down at scale. The data's driving it, but also the number of people engaged with their company is growing. And so if I take, for example, what is the investment opportunity? The investment opportunity starts small. It starts with increments. And so that's something that is a bit of concern for me, is whether we can get traction with our clients. But there's a published story about what Lowe's has done. And what Lowe's has done is taken the data they have and exhaustively analyzed it. They already had it. And then they started to enrich it with external data. And they're reaching what they believe will be that segment of one, and understand the experience of someone, whether they interact in a purchase through an automated means, online, through any number of ways, or directly in the store. So I'm a browser, I like to go in the store. Do they know what aisle I went to? They know what people I interacted with. Well, not today. 5, 10 years from now, we will see, as Ben described, as Ted described, there are many more touch points. The Internet of Things is just beginning. And really, it's the Internet of Everything, as Cisco describes.
Wow. I'm going to ask another question here. I'm going to put it up real. Where is the biggest challenges in this strategy, the strategy of using data to be able to improve and personalize an experience? Where are the big bottlenecks today? Is it simply a lack of strategy? Is it a lack of budget? Is it a lack of knowledge? Is it a lack of skills? Ben, what do you think?
Well, probably all of the above, Kevin. But the report tells us, the research in the report tells us, probably the number one thing is skills. You touched on it. Jack touched on it. It's a very clear message in the data that these companies are struggling to identify the right talent, hire the right talent, bring the right talent in. That's a very big challenge. I think, however, a lot of it builds on what Jack was just saying around the fact that, let's face it, guys, this is the brave new world. This is an area of incredible innovation, and typically there isn't much of clarity around the ROI of innovation, the return on innovation, rather than a return on investment. And this has been brought home to me very, very clearly recently, because unfortunately I can't mention their name. I wish I could, because it would make the anecdote even richer. But a very, very big company, who everybody on this listening to this would know, who has been pioneering the notion of understanding the digital fingerprint, the code halo in our language, has placed a very big bet on this commercially, spent a lot of money on this already, has recently come to us and asked us to help them figure out what the data is telling them. And isn't that interesting that they'd already gone down the road quite a long way, spent a lot of money, made a big commercial bet without actually really knowing what information they were going to get out of that, what the ROI in that was. They recognize that this is innovation, this is experimentation, this is a brave new world. But they're making the bet, they're forging ahead. And again, from my perspective in the Center for the Future of Work, that's what I think companies need to do. And I think that's what the work that Jack and Ted and others in Cognizant are doing, is help clients take those steps, make those leaps, make those big bets, have the confidence and the faith to do that. Because if you sit around and wait for a very, very clear ROI in this, I mean, we're going to be talking about that 2, 3, 5 years down the track, and the market will have just moved ahead again, and you'll be struggling to catch up even more.
Oh, yes. I fly Delta a lot, and I really appreciate when I do call a Delta call center that they know my number, and so they welcome me instead of asking who I am and what my account number is. I like the fact that they say, Kevin, Benedict, we recognize you because of your number. And they already know my itinerary, and they're there to help me. So that's one of those personalizations that I really like from a call center area. And I like the same thing from the Delta app, that it would recognize me, and it already knows where I'm going and has suggestions based on destinations, anything from rentals to hotels, etc. I like that because it saves me time and makes me feel like I'm important in their ideas. And I think all of us can recognize different experiences. But I personally cover a lot of topics around mobility, and I can tell you all the numbers I'm looking at, guys out there, is that mobile transactions and mobile commerce is increasing rapidly. So that's really telling me that there's going to have to be some significant investment and improvement in personalizing many apps represented by retailers and service providers out there. Is that the way you guys see it as well?
There's no question. I mean, when you look at Starbucks, for example, they're approaching 20% of all their transactions are now through their mobile application. And there's also a fair amount of study out there now about the decisions that consumers are making. When presented in the marketplace with two options, a lower friction option is going to attract their attention. I was speaking with the chief technology officer for one of the largest quick service restaurant companies in the world. And he was relating to me a story about how they track restaurants in the neighborhoods that they serve that are providing similar kinds of food. And they had seen mom and pop stores at an increasing rate over the last few years going out of business. And as they dug into the data and they started to understand what was happening, the interesting thing that began to emerge is that mobile transactions actually were one of the real trigger points, that the mom and pop stores did not have the wherewithal to be able to provide a mobile application to be able to order, pay, and receive loyalty points. And the chains did have that infrastructure. And you don't have to take all the business away from a company to have it become an unprofitable business and go under. You just have to take enough away, and the mobile ordering and payment was taking enough away that it was actually causing business failures.
Wow, that's significant. Jack, what about you?
Well, I've also worked with quick service restaurants with Ted, and I know they care about their community, so I don't think that they want that outcome. Certainly it doesn't add to the bottom line, but it does tell to the point that as we move, as I keep thinking 5 years down the road, we still have to have a nation where, and a world where businesses thrive. More than half of businesses and half the revenue, the gross national product in the United States comes from small businesses, and more than half of individuals are employed by small businesses. But look at the examples where they take the service model to a different level, the customer experience. Now, these businesses that we're discussing didn't match the customer experience you have in a Starbucks. Really, they don't. And so how do they do it? The boutique ones figure out a way. And so this is part of the creative destruction that we see in our marketplace that changes the economy. We will see destruction of many things, and not just the large businesses that have been pointed out. Go ahead, Ben.
No, I was just going to build on that a little bit and build on Ted's comment about, and that's a great word, frictionless. I heard another interesting anecdote similar to that one recently when I was in London taking a cab, and in London, if you've been there recently, you'll have seen the halo sign everywhere on the black London cab. It's kind of ironic that it's called Halo, because when we started writing the Halo book, we hadn't heard of that, we hadn't seen it. I'm not sure they'd heard of our idea, but it's interesting, sort of in the ether. But I was talking to one of the taxi drivers using the Halo app. It's a bit like Uber for people who know Uber. I think it's personally a little better than Uber, but that might be just because I'm a Londoner, But the taxi driver was telling me that in the year or so that that app has been in place and people in London have been ordering it, the volume of taxi rides in London has gone up 25%. Think about that. That's in a stable, mature environment. There's been no particular increase in the supply side. The demand hasn't changed. There hasn't been an influx of new demand. It's the same pool of potential demand. But because of that word that Ted used, frictionless, because it's so easy to order the cab, when I stumble out of the pub late at night, I don't have to fight with everybody else in the rain to try and hail a taxi in the traditional way. Because it's so easy, the volume has gone up 25%. So just make the mental leap, whatever industry you're in. If I could deploy the same technology, take the friction out of it, make the experience an experience, perhaps I could grow my revenues 25% as well. That to me is a kind of telling little anecdote.
Well, I know I can look at my own household here, and I know that rather than creating grocery lists all the time, my wife is using that Amazon Prime, that one click, and there's our soap, there's our toothpaste, there's whatever we need in the house, and it gets delivered the next day to our front door. Let's talk about frictionless. We're not having to drive and schedule time to go, and it's just popping up on the front door. My dogs no longer even bark at the delivery man. It's a shame. Let's now talk about what is, especially any of you guys that are talking directly with the end customers out there. Where do customers or our clients, the enterprises that we interact with, do they already have all this data and it's a challenge to personalize an experience based on data? Or is it the fact they're not even collecting the data that they could, that would in fact help them deliver a more personalized experience? Where do you see some of the bigger challenges, guys?
So I actually,
Sorry, Ted, I just mentioned the data, what the data's telling us, and then I'll throw it to you, and you can chime in from a sort of client work perspective. The data says, Kevin, quite clearly that they're not collecting as much data as they could. I can't remember the exact percentages in the report off the top of my head, but relatively small numbers, 20s, 30%, not 50%, 60%. So I think Ted touched on that a little bit earlier, that there is a lot of information out there, and companies are only really beginning to collect and make sense of a very small percentage of it.
Yeah.
So I think a reasonable question to ask is why? Why are they not collecting the right data? And one of the things that we see with our clients, and we've touched on it as a tangent to some of the points that we've made already, companies have a tendency to make investments in areas where they can measure the return. They know what the return is ahead of time. We can call it sort of reactive innovation, right? They see something that's happening in the marketplace, they understand what they need to do to react to it, and then they do something. And so the client that Ben mentioned, which made the investment to start collecting the data, well, they did it because they saw a real business purpose to it, even though they didn't see through to the end point, right, that there was going to be a benefit in the output of that process. And I think one of the big challenges that we have globally, not just in our company, is that we are organized as companies to be reactive to the market pressure instead of proactive. And the challenge in being reactive rather than proactive really comes down to timeline, because in the 100 years prior to this century, when the second industrial revolution was turning all these businesses into mass businesses, gave us the structures that we live in today, things moved slowly enough that you could study them, that you could understand them, that you could see how to react, and if you were at scale, you had the advantage of scale to know that even if an upstart came along, that you would still have the time to be able to react to it. That's not true anymore, right? Things are moving much faster in the 21st century, much too fast for companies to be reactive. And to me, we talk about the skills gap. The number one skill, proactive innovation. That's the number one thing I see missing at our clients.
Very good. I have Netflix in the house like just about everybody, I think. But when I would go to my Netflix account, it was always recommending things like Say Yes to the Dress, Cake Boss, Friends, Parks and Recreation. And I'm saying, you know what, that's not me. And although it was my family, it was not me. So I went and created a new profile called Head of the House, just because I could. And I went in there and I defined and added to that profile the kinds of movies and the kinds of subjects and things that I'm interested in. So now I don't have to go look at what looks like a teenage girl's desires for Netflix. I have one that's personalized for me. The recommendations are for me. The suggestions, all that are for me. Now that is a pleasure. So when we talk about data, it doesn't necessarily mean they have to get more private data about us. It just means that we have to be able to define our interests, whether in association with a particular vendor. And I'm very happy to define my likes on Netflix so I get what I want. What other kinds of issues are you seeing where people are trying to decide if this is too private or not private enough, or what sources of data can we in fact use to better serve our clients? Ted, why don't we just start with you?
Sure. Well, I do think the privacy issue is one that obviously we need to pay attention to, and both from an ethical perspective as businesses recognizing and respecting our customers, but also obviously from a legal perspective, and there's increasing regulation around the world because companies have unfortunately not taken the position of the respect that they ought to have in the first place. That having been said, though, I think the number one learning from customers are willing to give up their privacy, their in personal information, as you were saying with your Netflix example of the number of things that you're willing to tell Netflix about your interests. When two things happen. One is they trust the company, and so trust And trust has an entirely new meaning in the digital age in the 21st century than it did in the 20th century, and it'd be worth probably talking a little bit about that at some point. But so first of all, you have to trust the vendor that you're working with. But second, you have to see the advantage. And a good friend of mine who's one of the product development leaders at LinkedIn said this to me at one point. It's just really stuck with me. She said, when we think about adding a feature to LinkedIn that's going to collect data from our customers, the first thing we ask is, how does LinkedIn having that data actually benefit the customer? Right? So if you start from the perspective of thinking about the data you're collecting as not something only you benefit from as a company, but that you're actually finding a way that it's clear to the customer that it benefits them, like Netflix, of giving you better recommendations, then people are much more willing to give up that information.
Very good. Jack, do you have thoughts on that area?
Yes, I do, and it's hard to, easy to, I should say, to rhyme in and just be right the lines with everyone else here. One of the things that Ben and Oxford Economics brought out in the study is that hiring is important. The type of talent that you need to be responsive is very important, and we've all read in our group the Generation Z Effect, the Gen Z Effect by Tom Kalopoulos and Dan Kelson, Tom being the CEO of the Delphi Group, and Dan being with NFP Health as a senior analyst. So why do I bring that up and refer to the book? Because one of the things they talk about is it's not generational. The segment of one doesn't matter with respect to your age, but it does matter with your awareness. So if you're the kind of person who decides, I can make a profile on Netflix that's mine, and I don't want to have recommended movies that correspond to my granddaughter, let's say. I have a granddaughter, so I know that's true. So I've had enough Sesame Street and other things recommended to me. But where it is with the company is a culture change. So these Generation Z mentality is going to increase in percentage in the world, period. And companies, as Ted mentioned, have 100-year legacies of culture that's built around achieving efficiency, building better products, but not around serving the customer. But these employees that we want to bring into our companies, and ours is included, are going to be attracted, perhaps, but how do we keep them? And so that retention means that we need to change the way we work internally and with customers. Not only do our customers have to trust us, but our new employees have to trust us. We have to trust ourselves that we're going to be interested in an individual. And that's what it means with the segment one. You're actually interested.
Very, very good. It's not just about people. It's not just being able to serve external customers. It's also about serving your internal employees and partners, etc. Then.
Yeah, I think that give to get ratio. What Ted touched on, that notion of the value I receive from the information I give. Just in your Netflix experience. Kevin, that you're getting great value because they're recommending lots of movies featuring people wearing bow ties, presumably. Is enough for you to want to give them information. So I think that's crucial. And again, as Ted says, the notion of earning, keeping trust. Trust is going to become the new arena for battlegrounds of competitive differentiation. You'll be able to differentiate on the product, on the service, but integral to that service will be how you avoid the creepiness factor, how you avoid taking a misstep and misreading the data. We've all seen examples where companies have misread the data, come up with some pretty wonky correlations, and then put offers in front of customers which either creep them out or are just completely wide of the mark and sort of have a negative effect rather than a positive effect. So this is a completely new area, and as Ted says, the ethics around that I think is going to be a fascinating space to watch, because you're going to gravitate to the companies that treat you well, deal with you ethically, who you believe in, and you're going to be very very nervous or very loath to interact with a business that's treating you badly or treating other people badly. We live in a United Breaks Guitars world nowadays, and That's as Trevor Noah is finding out this very moment, the new host of The Daily Show. Things move very, very quick in this new 21st century world.
Absolutely. And let me just take a quick poll of the participants that we have here. How many of you have ever done a search for a product, but the search results took you to a website you've never heard of? So you just kind of read what they said, but then you jump back to a more trusted website in order to buy that product. I'll raise my hand. What about you guys? Oh, absolutely. I mean, you go out there and say, okay, I saw this information out there, but on a website I'm not familiar with, so let's go back and buy it on Amazon.
The travel industry was hit with this, some time ago, where reviews were seeded with untrustworthy shills, right? And so when you search for a hotel in the old days, what you would find is all these are promoted links. Well, Google's changed that, so that's kind of gone away. I just wanted to get to the hotel site, not to some promoter. But the other aspect of that is a company called Airbnb. And they've, like Uber, have disintermediated the whole business. So where you find accommodation that's part of the experience, and you can change that experience to your liking. And it's more of a social experience. So we haven't spoken much about social interaction, but it isn't tracking social engagement. It's also understanding it and participating in it as part of the trust. I'll close with another thought that one of our colleagues, David Cushman, has written a book about the open business. And that word is transparency. It's unavoidable. Businesses in the past could sell products and obscure the reality of the product. So, let's take soap. Soap in the old days was pumped up with a lot of air. We don't have to buy soap pumped up with air anymore unless we like soap that'll float on water.
Absolutely. So in wrapping up here, let me just ask the final question here. How important is the whole notion of supporting the optimal, personalized user experience in a digital environment? How important is that for companies today? Ben, let's start with you.
Well, clearly it's absolutely key in the way that we look at the world through this sort of Code Halo prism. We talk about the first $1 trillion club in the Code Halo book, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, these kind of big known brands. And we say if you want to be in the second $1 trillion club of companies that really take it to the next level, this is the route. This is the kind of lever you need to pull. So I think it's absolutely key. And I think the companies that miss this in the next 6 months, the next year, I think they're going to find the road ahead pretty tough.
Ted?
Yeah, I want to make a shout out for B2B businesses because I think we spent a lot of the discussion today talking about the B2C customer experience. Digital customer experience is equally as important in B2B. And more than half of the companies that I'm working with right now are actually B2B companies looking at how they can disrupt their markets by doing a better job of connecting with their business-to-business customers. So don't sit back on your hands and think, oh, well, that's just something for consumers to worry, consumer-focused companies to worry about. It's not. It's every single company. It is crucially important.
Got it. And so, yeah, everybody. What about you, Jack? How important is it?
I'm glad Ted brought up that last point because CEOs in these kind of companies now recognize that the support experience is critical. You buy, electronic systems that fail during a critical time, you want to have a good support experience. If you don't, you just start looking for alternatives, and that's one, but also the partners. Partners will begin to offer services that they'll ration, and they'll give them to other companies that deal with them in a better way.
I'll just add there that, what's important, another part that's important about all of this is understanding what data is now possible to collect, especially in the area of mobile devices. The new iPhone has something like 15 different sensors. What does the information collected on those sensors, what does that contribute to a database, and how can that information help you understand who your client is? Fitness apps, they know how many steps you take if you're in the mountains or if you're on a level ground when you work out. All of these kinds of things can help them sell better shoes. Those are the kinds of things, time, location, activities and behaviors. Those things are so important because if you understand those things and can do that in an ethical, transparent way so that the customer's volunteering that kind of information, and you can look at that information and say, boy, this really tells me that this person's active, this person lives in the mountains, this person does this and this and this, so I'm going to create a profile that's entirely different. So that kind of information can mean all the difference between customer loyalty and brand presentation from the brand. With that, I want to thank Ben, I want to thank Ted and Jack for sharing your expertise with all of us today, and I would invite all of you to visit the futurework.com website. Again, futureofwork.com. Subscribe to Ben, subscribe to the authors there, follow us on Twitter. You can get some very powerful information on where these markets are going very rapidly. With that, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you.